The culture of the United Kingdom remained inimical to Catholics throughout the many decades of the Union of Great Britain and Ireland, ki bizim istediğimiz dönemde bu biliyorsunuz. On account initially of its pronounced Protestantism and latterly of its increasing secularism. Gördüğünüz gibi ilk önce protestanlık ve daha sonraki yıllar içerisinde de 20. asır içerisinde artık sekülerizm diyebileceğimiz laikliğe doğru bir dönüş var. Irish Catholics prefer to remain reticent about their religion or simply to insist on its respectability. This understandable defensiveness was not, however, a promising basis for fiction, but the hostility that elicited it partly explains the ready audience for the work of oppositional Irish Catholic writers after 1891, the year of the death of the disgraced nationalist leader Charles Stewart Parnell. Blame for that event, vividly recalled in the argument during Christmas dinner in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, was laid by many at the door of the church. Members of the small but vocal Catholic intelligentsia came to see the latter as a dominating and coercive social and moral force in society. These journalists, teachers, and others used fiction in the period between 1891 and the Irish independence in 1922. Artık 1922'de de bildiğiniz üzere Kuzey İrlanda İngiltere'ye bağlı kalıyor. Serbest İrlanda kendi cumhuriyetini ilan ediyordu. To argue both against personal limitation and in favor of a more liberal society. The Ireland which intelligentsia writers claimed had come about after 1891 was something like the one which ascendancy writers feared would eventuate from the granting of Catholic emancipation in 1829. Allowing Catholics to sit as members of parliament, though itself a limited measure, removed the loss of the penal laws and seemed to presage the final accession of the Catholic majority in the public life. Artık burada parlamenter sistemde de ufak tefek de olsa yavaş da gitse bir değişimler göze çarpıyor. Early 19th century Whig politicians and novelists such as Sidney Owenson, Lady Morgan, had urged it on grounds of prudence, but to their consternation saw it achieved by the populist agitation of Daniel O'Connell in the 1820s. During that decade, the Catholic novelists Gerald Griffin and the brothers Michael and John Benham acceded to the national tale, the genre of Owenson and Maria Edgeworth, and transformed it into an instrument of cultural combat in favor of Catholic emancipation. Bu bir öz ve normal bir şekilde bir ifadeler verilmiş burada. Esas bizi ilgilendiren daha çok bu 1820'ler. John Benham's The Boyne Water combines the national tale with the historical novel. Introductory remarks made by the narrator indicate a desire to transcend the partisan myths surrounding the conflict between King James and King William in the 1690s. Büyük bir çekişmeler oluyordu, hatırlayın 1600'lü yıllar hep böyleydi İngiltere'de. So that Irish people of all political and religious persuasions might recognize each other as belonging to a common country and exchanging the password. Burada bir bütünlüğü göstermeye çalışıyor. Bir tek bir ülke olarak İrlanda ve İngiltere'nin tek bir ülke olduğu anlatılmaya çalışılıyor. This is my native land diye bir ifade var. In the novel, Robert Evelyn wishes to marry Eva MacDonald and his sister Esther to marry her brother Edmund. The Protestant Evelyns from an old English family long settled in Ireland are identified as English. The Catholic MacDonalds of contested Irish or Scots ancestry as Irish. The novel tests whether these personal relationships can survive the political and sectarian polarization of the times and perhaps even serve as national marriages for a prophetic future time. such as the one within which Benham was writing, if not for the 1690s. Other times will naturally create another spirit. Güzel bir ifade. Historical events are witnessed at first hand through Evelyn's tolerant eyes. He reproves those who hold a right to scoff at the devotions of others, and wishes for religion to be kept out of politics. Shall the world ever grow old enough to limit priests to the inculcation of a peacemaking creed and let honest men, nay, even knaves, mind their own business and fight their own quarrels? As Ireland begins to divide militarily, suspicions within the two couples grow, and their joint marriage ceremony ends in disarray and division, exacerbated by the intransigent clergy present. Amity is restored only when isolating extremes of topography and climate allow the principal characters to set historical circumstances aside. The two couples initially meet at a precipice during a storm, and Edmund and Evelyn are later reconciled while escaping waves by scrambling up a cliff at night. A renewal of friendship then, solider foes though we are. Buralar pek önemli değil. Sadece eserden biraz önemli noktalara değinmiş yazar. Relationships across the sectarian divide need, it seems, to be nurtured in an entirely private sphere. National marriages are fraught with difficulty, and indeed Esther actually dies. The corollary to the retreat of the couples to the private sphere is their increasing invisibility in the historical realm. They move across the lines of the siege of Derry with little difficulty, and Evelyn manages to have conversations with both King William and King James during the Battle of the Boyne. Even gender seems to lose its specificity when, for a time, Eva appears to have been transformed into a young man. The Boyne Water exemplifies the difficulties of writing an historical novel in Ireland, where characters are unable to steer a moderate course between extremes as they do in the fiction of Sir Walter Scott. Michael Benham thought his brother's novel too polemical. His own historical novel of Irish sectarian and political divisions, The Croppy, about the 1798 rebellion, tries to strike a more moderate note and was well received in England. If the Boyne Water looks backwards to the romantic writing of Morgan, John Benham's The Knowlands appears to look forwards to a realistic engagement in fiction with the life of the Catholic community itself. As the Puritanism of the devotional revolution took hold over the following decades, however, little came of this new trend. Indeed, it is possible to see the Knowlands as helping to close off the very opportunity it was also opening up. At the center of the novel is a morality tale about a far John Nolan, once his comfortable farming family's hope and pride. Afterwards, their shame and affliction. What proves his undoing is the friendship between him and his sister Peggy and Letty Adams and her brother Frank, members of the Ascendancy. John finds himself on fire for Letty, aşık oluyor, and engrossed by the library of her uncle Charles Long, though when Frank urges him to marry Letty, he somewhat imprecisely retorts, "I have wrought my woe, sir." Both couples soon marry, however, though these are not politically healing national marriages, but examples of an almost Gothic moral misgeneration. Burası çok önemli. Almost Gothic moral misgeneration. Villainous Frank seduces Peggy and marries her only at the point of John's pistols. John and the virtuous lettuce elope, but even she knows that their religiously and tribally trans- transgressive union will be published by social ostracism and his own sense of guilt. I knew you would immolate yourself, John, to your wretched Letty. The novel's candor in dealing with such issues as abortion, prostitution, marital abuse, and clerical sexuality strikes a surprisingly modern note. Yet this candor is chiefly a warning of the dangers of a lack of a strict moral education and of Catholics associating with the ascendancy. In many ways, therefore, the Nolans advocates the greater Puritanism and reticence which did come about in the later 19th century and which would make its own very candor largely impossible in subsequent fiction. Griffin's The Collegians begins and ends with a national marriage. The first is secret marriage of volatile, romantic heartdress Cregan of marginal ascendancy background to the Catholic peasant. Ailey O'Connor, which ends in her murder by Cregan's servant, so that his master can pursue a more remunerative match. The second is the marriage of ultra respectable Curly Daly, son of Catholic middlemen, to the ascendancy-born Anne Tude. Though liked by readers, to Griffin's dismay, Cregan was designed to represent the anachronistic, personalized power of the ascendancy. When arrested by impartial enforcers of the law, neither the aristocratic hauteur of his mother nor the feeble resistance of his drunken duelist friends can save him. Yet there is something unintentionally chilling about Daly, whose face is pale and bright with the serenity of triumphant virtue. As with the Nolans, ecclesiastics are not the disciplined group they would be seen to be later in the century. Cregan and O'Connor are married by a shabby priest that was disgraced by his bishop. Even Ailey's uncle, Fr. Edward O'Connor, a positive clerical presence, is endowed with less than self-sacrificing zeal. He resents the loss of the quiet lodgings, a civil landlady, regular hours of discipline, and the society of my oldest friends, of his city curacy and exile to a country parish in so dreary a peopled wilderness.